In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at 3D shapes in TV and movie spacecraft design. Many of these are very iconic. This first one is a spacecraft from the movie 2001. That movie was created in 1968, but it has a realistic and rather futuristic look to it. But the main area in the front of the spacecraft, a simple sphere, and just adding detail into it and having the 3 circles in the front, which are bay doors for pods to come out. In the movie, they had this classic space station, which are like 2 wheels together in space. And what's interesting with all their design is they have very good silhouette. Like, they look interesting from any angle, which was the design thought and process, because they want to be very visual, particularly in movies. And here's a piece of artwork close up. So here's a nice composition of the space station and a spacecraft exiting out of the bay door. And at the time in 1968, this really hadn't been seen before. This was all pretty revolutionary and new. It became a real iconic movie for space travel and spacecraft design. Also, what's cool in the movie, when you're designing, you're thinking, what will things look like in the future? And in this case here, they're actually predicting an iPad, in 68. And many decades later that we actually have that. So whoever designed and came up with this concept got it right. And it's amazing how sometimes movies do predict what's in store for us down the road. So that's cool when you're doing design work on a TV show, film, or whatever, and if you can create something iconic and new, and that it actually becomes a reality, that's very cool. So looking at that sphere, here's a sports basketball, and it has that spherical shape and the lines, so we can see that 3D structure to it. And how they use that very simple shape in creating, in Star Wars, the Death Star. It's not much more than a basketball with that line engraved around it. Of course, it does have this cannon area here sculpted into the side. But the idea, this is the size of a planet, is in the detail. Looking at all that little detail on the sides, but very basic shape. And it's iconic when you think Star Wars. This is one of the shapes and space objects in the movie that is memorable. And of course, design in a movie, and then being clever with that design, and now here making it into a cookie jar. So marketing on all these things. We want interesting shapes, not only for the movie, TV show, but also for the marketing possibilities. And the more creative and the more interesting those are, the more successful. And here's that Death Star again from a different angle, and this huge battle cruiser coming up to it. Here's another oldie, mid-60s, Star Trek and the original Enterprise. You can see some very basic shapes. You can see the cylinders being used in the back for the engine pods, and then a cylinder at the bottom with this radar on front, and how they're connected with these shapes, and then the really iconic saucer shape at the top and the front, where the command post is and a lot of the living quarters. So what's interesting about this design is that it is very interesting and looks great, good silhouette from whatever angle you look at it from. So here's that traditional 3/4 front, but slightly from the bottom. Here's a 3/4 back, looking at it as it crosses by, so you can still see those shapes. And the way they are connected and scaled to each other's proportions. Getting the proportions right so that, whatever angle you look at, it creates an interesting silhouette and is visually interesting and really makes the image iconic because it's very distinctive. Here's 3/4 front, but from a top looking down. So we can really see that front saucer shape really being effective, and what we're really familiar with in the original design of this craft. And here's a 3/4 almost side view, but down from the bottom. And again, every time you look at it, you can distinctively see where the motors are, you know, the engines and the front saucer shape and the body that's all connecting these pieces together. So very distinctive and very simple shapes, and it's a matter of detail and just, you know, adding a little bit to make it, you know, give it some scale. And then here is a blueprint, plan views of the straight side view, straight top view, straight front view. And even all those views are quite interesting when you look at them in the 2D shape idea. So sometimes working on a design is looking at the 2D shapes and putting them together so they're distinctive, and then the 3D form and seeing if it maintains that interesting composition and silhouette. And here, again, merchandising. Here we go, pizza cutter of the Enterprise. So keep an eye out for that one. That'd be cool. And it's actually functional. So it's looking at that function, and you know, this is an interesting and clever marketing design to use that in this practical sense. And now we've got a few more images, different sizes. So the top one is a more updated version of, and again, Star Trek's been around for decades, and they keep updating, but still maintaining the original concept, but just making the designs and the shapes a little bit more sophisticated and not as simple as it was at the beginning. And here's, you know, a real streamlined, interesting, but still keeping the concept there. So it's developing an idea. That's why I say don't go with your first idea and concept. Work it and get it even better. And through the decades that Star Trek existed, they've updated and streamlined and modernized and made the shapes all that more interesting. And here's another one. And these are those plan views. So we got a top view, bottom view, side view, and you can see how they really streamlined out the idea, but the concept's there from the original. It's just, you know, really fine-tuning those shapes to make it interesting. And then our front and back view at the lower right. Now, went from TV show to movie. And Star Wars, back to you know, a different craft outside of the sphere, starting with a basketball there and looking at the Death Star. Here we have a TIE fighter, and looking what the basic shapes are. And again, it's silhouette that really makes these iconic and memorable. That it wasn't like a blobby ship. They actually took some very distinct, simple 3D shapes, and even 2D shapes and 3D forms to piece this together. And just to show what I mean, here's that angle of which we can see that structure. But when you really break it down, there's that basketball, that's that simple sphere, and working that up. And now what can you add to that to come up with those interesting side pods here? And it's finding inspiration from anywhere, the world around us. And wouldn't be surprised if designers were on their way to work and went, well, there's an interesting shape. See that all the time. How about we stick those on the sides of the TIE fighter and making it very distinctive. And then adding those shapes. And then it's a matter of connecting. So they've used some cylinders to connect from the sphere to the stop sign shapes here, and then worked out some detail and working out scale. And here's a very detailed 3D rendering of you know, the geometry that makes up those shapes. So it's starting simple and then you know, modifying, adding detail, and putting those shapes together and playing around with the proportion to get it just right so that it's a very striking design and looks cool from any angle. Okay. Here we go, Halloween coming up. You too can be a TIE fighter. So interesting, you know, the fans coming up and using these designs, and functional as headgear. I don't know how functional. So any spacecraft, and particularly movie TV, it's starting out with simple shapes like in the upper left here, and then adding detail for scale and to help start modifying the shape. And then experimenting, playing around, and seeing how you can make that very distinctive and think about silhouette as well as the 3D forms that we're working with. Okay, so I think that's about it. So I want you to start experimenting, play around, particularly on this one, Spacecraft. Can you come up with an interesting, and it can be simple, but using shapes, forms, and playing around with proportions and how they fit together, and can they make an interesting silhouette?